By the way, this part of the show is brought to you by Pure Genius Waters. It's a genius way to quench your thirst. Old pal of mine, of course, everyone knows him in the Toronto area, voice of the Maple Leafs for many years. Joe Bowen joins me. Joe, thanks for picking up the phone and coming on at short notice.
Not a problem, Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm good, and if folks don't know who've been watching the show all morning, your name came up this morning with Henny. Paul Hendrick from Leafs TV, of course, you know very well. And we were talking about, as I've been paying tribute to this day in history, various things that happened. 1981, Jamaican Canadian Trevor Berbick beat former heavyweight champion Ali, unanimous decision, down in Nassau. It was 39 years old, Ali was at the time. Second comeback, and it was his last fight. And he said you called it, and apparently that's true.
Yes, it is. I'd known Trevor for quite a few years while I was in Halifax. One of the great career decisions that I made, he arrived at my house one day and asked if I would be interested in being his PR guy.
You said no.
I said, I think I'm going to give hockey a little more of an opportunity, and I said no, and I was thankful a few years later that I did, because
well, so are we.
Through an awful lot of problems and then an untimely demise and various other things. But he was the Canadian heavyweight champion. He had fought Larry Holmes, and I called that fight in Las Vegas a year prior. And so when this came up, I got an opportunity to do it on radio from Nassau in the Bahamas, and the whole promotion was a complete an utter fiasco.
Or was it really?
The promoter, they were trying to build a stadium in a baseball stadium. Right. And it took them forever to get the scaffolding in and the seats in. Then it rained, torrential downpour, so people were arriving to get the ringside seats in their Sunday go-to-meeting vest. Fortunately, they were about ankle deep in mud.
Oh.
They got to them. Then they started the undercard and realized they only had 2 sets of gloves.
Oh, no.
So the entire undercard used 1 set of gloves. By the end of the 3rd or 4th fight, those things must have weighed about a ton and a half. Then Ali and Berbick used the other ones. When they got started at the fight, they realized, unfortunately, no one had a bell.
Oh, my God.
So Muhammad Ali was rung into the ring and heard, every time the rounds ended, a cowbell that was borrowed from the Calypso band. It was a schmozzle from start to finish. There was all kinds of problems with the undercard. Don King ended up getting punched out in a hotel over money and various other things. It was a schmozzle, and as I said at the time, this was the last straw for Nassau. If it wasn't the Thrilla in Manila, it was the last straw for Nassau.
Ali, of course, had retired a couple of times. He came out in 1980, as you'll remember. You mentioned Larry Holmes. And I'm a huge boxing fan. Anyways, he got beat against Larry Holmes, who, for folks of our era, Joe and my era, would know Larry Holmes was like his sparring partner, and it was a bit of a surprise. And Ali decided, he wanted another fight. He didn't want to go out that way, and that's kind of the way the fight with Berbick in the Bahamas came about. Now, I don't know how much, I'm sure you remember the fight, but Ali didn't do too badly in the middle rounds, but he kind of faded away towards the end. Is that a correct recollection?
Yeah, I think so, Brian. Trevor Berbick carried him. I'm pretty sure that Trevor could have knocked him out.
Okay.
But what? Trevor had a soft spot in his heart for Ali, and I don't think that he, in the latter rounds, really went after him. I think he carried him so that it did go to a decision. I don't think that there was any question that at that point in time in Ali's career, and Trevor Berbick was a much younger man.
Yes.
That he could have really done a lot of damage and did not. And unfortunately, we've seen what's transpired with Ali after his fight career and everything else. And he was just a shell of himself.
Yes.
There was no question about that. He had no business being in that ring, other than to make money for his entourage, of which he had a great deal.
Bodini Brown and all the rest. And I remember, now that you mention it, Joe, thanks for bringing back all these memories for all of our listeners and viewers out there. I remember seeing a man who was such a magnificent specimen during his glory days, and seeing him with layers of fat on him and have to hunker down in the corner and just let a guy beat up on him. I remember how saddened I was of that. And speaking of sad, just to bring this full circle, and I'll let you go, Joe, just to bring it full circle, Trevor Berbick, I seem to remember in somewhere in the 2000s, 2005, 2006, I think they found him dead in a church courtyard down near Kingston, Jamaica, and in fact his nephew and a friend of his, I believe, were charged with the killing.
Yeah, that's the recollection I have of it as well. It was an untimely demise. He was a pretty good heavyweight in that era, of which there were a number.
Yeah.
And he never, other than the Canadian Championship, he was never able to really climb the ladder to the big titles. But he was there. There was about 4 or 5 of them in that ilk that were the heavyweights, and unfortunately now that aspect of sport is almost non-existent, and it's been replaced by UFC and street brawling in a cage, and I'm a better sports fan for it, I'll tell you that.
Joe, you know, the one thing I'll finish off about Ali, I've always talked about, and you I'm sure have many times yourself, during our lifetime, there's been eras of guys that we haven't had a chance to see that we wish we were alive to see, whether it was Rocket Richard or Joe Louis or Babe Ruth. But then there's the other side of it. We were lucky to be alive to see them. And you and I both, being around the same age anyways, have been lucky to see Ali during his greatest days. And the fight that he had with Berbick, one thing about Ali is that he traveled this world and he gave all kinds of guys like Cleveland Williams and Ernie Terrell and Ernie Shavers, George Chuvalo up here in Toronto, and lots of other guys. He gave them fights for a chance, to make some money, and he put himself out there, didn't he?
Well, he sure did. I mean, he made it a worldwide heavyweight championship.
Yeah.
No question, he was the world champion of boxing, and he had various venues from the Philippines to Africa to wherever. And you're right, he took it around the world. Now, a lot of that was because of his decision not to go in the draft, and they wouldn't let him fight in the United States.
Yes, great. That's how come he ended up fighting here in Toronto, right, for the first one.
That's exactly right. So, but he gave everybody that was out there the opportunity, and they came up more times than not wanting in the department of being a champion the way Ali was.